This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. When King David was very old, he could not keep warm, even when they put covers over him. Bathsheba went to see the aged king in his room, where Abishag the Shunammite was attending him. Bathsheba bowed down, prostrating herself before the king. "What is it you want?" the king asked. She said to him, "My lord, you yourself swore to me, your servant, by the Lord your God. Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne." The king then took an oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble, I will surely carry out this very day what I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne in my place." Then Bathsheba bowed down with her face to the ground, prostrating herself before the king, and said, "May the Lord, King David, live forever." When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. "I am about to go the way of all the earth," he said. "So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel."
I'd like to tell you something I've learned about frogs. Maybe you've heard of this research done some time ago, but it really is very relevant to our lesson today. The conclusion of the research: if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, it'll jump out. However, if you put a frog in a lukewarm pot of water and slowly turn up the heat, you'll be able to cook him and have some scrumptious frog legs for dinner. I heard they taste like chicken. How can this be? A frog can notice sudden changes like boiling water, but does not detect small incremental changes. When the frog does, it's too late. This is the story of Solomon, the main character of chapter 13 of the story. He started off as a strong frog. He could leap over lily pads like no one else. He was a blue blood frog, son of a king. Any princess would consider it a huge privilege to kiss this frog, and in the end, 700 do. But he got himself in a lukewarm pot of water that slowly got hotter and eventually cooked him. He started off strong, but finished poorly. Let me tell you of his tale. Chapter 13 opens up with King David at his end. He maintains his promise to make the son of Bathsheba the next king. Solomon had everything going for him. His dad is passing the leadership to him in great shape. They are financially successful and strong. No trillion-dollar debt hanging over him. They are not at war. No Gaza Strip problems or squabbles with the Palestinians, like we see so much today. King David even gave him the secrets of continued success in the speech you just heard. And Solomon starts off super strong. In this chapter, God comes to Solomon and tells him to ask for anything he wants. Solomon asked for wisdom to be able to carry out his duties, to properly govern the people, to discern right from wrong. Wow. How tempting not to ask for wealth or power or long life or a really cool car, or in Solomon's case, a 3-hump camel. God is pleased with Solomon's response, answers his request, and gives him wealth, honor, and power to boot. Solomon demonstrates this wisdom right off the bat. There are two ladies who have a dispute about a newborn baby. Both are claiming to be the mother. Solomon tells his men to cut the baby in two and give each mother a half. The first woman thought this was a reasonable solution. The second woman asked for the baby to be given to the first unharmed. Showing wisdom, Solomon gave the baby to the second woman. Now, I tried this with my boys when they were younger, fighting over Hot Wheel cars. It didn't work so well. They wanted to see me saw it in two. Solomon wrote his wisdom down for all of us to read. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon are filled with the sampling of lukewarm pots of water we should avoid. For example, here's one. Better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife. No, that's not the one I was thinking of. How about this one in Proverbs? A gossip betrays a confidence, so avoid anyone who talks too much. In just his 4th year as king, he starts to build the temple for God's presence to rest. When the temple is complete, God comes to Solomon and tells him in plain English, or rather Hebrew, that if you continue to follow me, you will finish strong, and you will pass the kingdom to your son in the same great shape your father did for you. However, if you don't follow me, you'll get cooked, and it will cause a spiral in the nation, and the throne will be taken from your family. Solomon's popularity is growing. He is a rock star. People come from everywhere to see him and sit at his feet, like the Queen of Sheba. Jeremiah may have been a bullfrog, but so was Solomon. But then we come to the end of Solomon's life and his 40-year reign, and we see he got cooked. All kinds of trouble and adversaries emerge. It ends up destroying the nation. He started strong, but finished poorly. What happened? Solomon jumped into one of those proverbial pots of lukewarm water he wrote about. Which one? Let me read it to you. King Solomon, however, loved many wives besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. Solomon knew this was a bad idea. He wrote about it. God told him straight up, but Solomon jumped in anyway. He might have thought he was strong enough to handle it. His passion may have simply been greater than his love for wisdom. He jumps in the pot and everything seems to be working just fine. But as Solomon grew older, as time passed, the pot began to simmer and Solomon's strength weakened. He starts worshiping other gods, and that's the boiling point. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to end up cooked in a boiling pot. Do you? Yet none of us wakes up and says, "I'd like to get boiled to death. I'd like to wreck and ruin my life and the lives of others. I'd like to end up as a plate of frog legs that taste like chicken." It doesn't happen overnight. We jump in a pot of lukewarm water and we fail to see that the devil is turning up the flame underneath. But it happens to the best of us. If Solomon was the wisest guy to ever live and he jumped in, what makes us think we are too smart to do such a thing? Now, if you're a Christian, you need to realize that God has a call in our life, a purpose. Just like the Israelites and Solomon were called to point people to Christ by the way they lived, so we are a part of the church and are also called to point people to Christ by our lives. God has put people into our lives, our family, people we work with, people we go to school with, people we live around. How we live our lives in Christ before them will give witness that Jesus is not dead, but alive, resurrected. In other words, how we live our lives matter. Our prayer needs to be that we'll not only start strong, but finish strong. The truth is, many hearing these words have already been cooked in a pot of some sort. It may be what drew you to the study of the story in the first place. You're looking for help and you're looking for mercy. Listen to this. Even though this didn't stop the avalanche of consequences at the end of Solomon's life or even after. He realizes what he has done and turns back to God. We see this at the conclusion of his great book, the book of Ecclesiastes. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of every human being. It is never too late to come back to God. He will receive you with open arms.
Good morning. How are y'all doing today? It's a little cooler today than it was yesterday or 2 days ago. So welcome back to winter. Raise your hands if you have absolutely everything that you've ever wanted or desired in your life. Anyone? Anyone even close? This is a story about a man who had just that. Probably the only person in the history of the world that has had just that. A man who had a great father, one that God says was after his own heart. He learned from a mother who loved him, a man who inherited everything, and from inheriting everything, asked God for wisdom, which God gave him, and he grew everything into much, much more. This is a story about a man that at his prime, every leader in the world wanted to come to him for advice and just to be in his presence. This is a king with everything that any of us combined can imagine. He had it all. But before we get to all of that, I want to think back to last week just a little bit. His father, David. Y'all remember the name of one of his main enforcers, servants that was with him for a long time and did his bidding? Joab. Correct. Somebody said it. Did Joab do everything David asked him to do? Before Bathsheba, he did. But we all know what happened with Bathsheba. We all know what David did to her husband. From that time on, Joab looked at David differently. He saw the flaws in his king. He went against his wishes occasionally. Why is that? I mean, he saw the flaws. I'm going back to this because it lays a stark contrast to today's lesson, and it's a lesson for us that I think we need to admit to. If we know somebody and we put them on a pedestal because of their history, because of who they are, because of their status, whatever the case may be, and they screw up, and you know how bad they screwed up, what is your view of them the rest of your life? Do you remember that? You remember how they screwed up? Do you take their word as gospel now? Do you believe everything they say now? That is the nature of us. We don't forget. We tend to hold on to those things. We tend to use those as ammunition in the future. But as you go through everything you read about Solomon, when God is talking to Solomon and he's referring back to Solomon's father, David, do you hear or see anything written out of the mouth of God that references David's flaws? Anything at all? God constantly refers to David when he's talking to Solomon as the man that was after my own heart, the man who loved me, who followed my directions, who sought me. Sometimes that's hard for us to do when we look at each other. Do we see the good or do we see the flaws? That's the contrast in these two stories and how God does stuff in our life. So let's get into Solomon. So David's dying. He's very old. He can't even stay warm anymore. And Bathsheba comes to him and asks for the promise that he had made to her, that her child would be the next king. And that boy's name is Solomon. And he honored that. Let's look again at they just read it, so we won't necessarily look at it, but what did David say to Solomon? So last time he spoke to his son, keep God's commandments. If you had an opportunity to talk to your child, to give them one thing to go into life with, and you knew it was the last time you were going to speak to them, don't you want that to be the last thing? Honor God, keep his commandments, and everything will be fine in your life. That's what David left his son with. That's the lasting memory that Solomon had of his father. He saw how he lived. He heard the words from his father. And now he's about to live a life like no other. So God comes to him and says, I'll give you whatever your heart desires. Tell me what that is. And Solomon says, wisdom. Did God like that answer? Most definitely he did. So God gives him wisdom, but not only that, God liked the answer so much, he gave him everything else. Riches, fame, glory. So let's stop right there. I want to ask a question. What do you see in the heart of God by the way he responded to Solomon's request for wisdom? What are some of those things that stand out to you? He's generous. Very, very pleased. What else? I wrote down generosity also. So, how do you obtain wisdom, typically? Life's experience. What else? You learn from others around you, don't you? His priorities are different than ours. So, God told Solomon, I'm going to give you wisdom unlike anyone that has ever lived or ever will. If God came and told you that you would be the smartest, wisest person that would ever walk the earth, you'd pass out. Some of us would say, no, thank you. Too much responsibility. In today's world, I had a conversation at work I'm dealing with a lot of stuff at work for repairs for the tornado, and it just amazes me the lack of common sense that's out there when talking to people. And I know all of y'all have seen that and heard that, and it's just, you just sit there and go, how did you make it this long in this life? I don't know. But here's a man who God gave all this wisdom, but did he give it? Do you think his experiences and his wealth and his 1,000 women and his travels and his sacrifices to other gods and all of the stuff that he did in his life, did that contribute or not?
God knew what was going to happen to him. And I think it verifies and validates that we have choices. And so Solomon had too much, and it overwhelmed him, and he couldn't handle it, really. He really could not handle it.
He couldn't handle it in the way God wanted him to, for sure.
The thought came to me that we would not know of Solomon's life and his wisdom if the printed word had not been printed. He would just be another man who had all his wealth, all his women, all his reign, but God chose to record those qualities
Mm-hmm.
in print to be sent through the ages.
Yeah.
For us. That's the key, I think, to his wisdom is that it was from God and God preserved that.
Yes. Through many books.
God does answer our prayers like he did Solomon. He gave him
Mhm.
of what we continue on with what God has given to us. And I think that's a good thing that we need to really think about.
Yeah. Even through, what I think is interesting is even through his screw ups, the things that he was doing against God's will, examples, his 700 wives from various places. Those relationships, those garnered goodwill with those countries, with those people at first. They wanted to have a relationship with Israel. They wanted to have a relationship with Solomon. His wisdom in how he dealt with them, his financial arrangements with them continued to grow Israel and those other countries. I want you to imagine today's world, in today's world. Do you know any politician out there, any leader of any country, where every other country wants to come to them for wisdom, for an association with them? I can't even fathom that. We can't even, 50% of the people in our country can barely like one person. But to have somebody with so much wisdom and power that every leader wanted to be with them and know them and have arrangements with them. And then you ask the question, with all that wisdom, why 1,000 women? I mean, I love Robin, but I cannot imagine having to manage households like that. What he had to do, and not just households, but relationships with their families, with their countries, the magnitude is unreal if you really think about it. And if he spent one day hanging out with each of them, he would see them once every 3 years. That's a crazy thought. So all of his proverbs that he wrote, all this knowledge he put down, did y'all write down any that were your favorites, stuff that kind of hit you? If so, let's hear them and why. Yes.
In our time, the way I understand about the Holy Spirit, if we submit to the Holy Spirit, two things happen. He gives us wisdom and understanding of the Scriptures.
Yes, he does. The Holy Spirit gives us the understanding of the Scriptures. So you'll turn to Proverbs 6:16 through 19. I want to read that to you real quick. This is one of the ones that stuck out to me. And I think it's because I've been, the world we live in right now and the political climates and things of that nature, and seeing the people and dealing with the people that we deal with on a daily basis. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, the heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. How many of those things hit home with what we deal with daily now? There are more people that like to stir up conflict in the community than I think have ever existed, at least in my lifetime. Now, Proverbs 21, 2 and 3. A person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Doing what is right in the eyes of the Lord is not always easy. Sometimes he quotes sacrifice that we use as an excuse. Well, I'm going to go do this instead of what I should be doing. And God will accept that. Well, no. He wants you to do his will. Plain and simple. And it's not always easy. And for me, I have to stop ignoring that. I have to stop ignoring what I see him put in front of me. And I can always have 1,000 excuses to do something else, or to do something that's good, but just not what God put in front of me. And if any of you are like me, we have to stop. We have to do what's in front of us, what God's telling us to do. And that's not always easy to do. Ben? We're supposed to be united for his glory. So Solomon, I was watching a movie about David and Samuel last night, so that's what came to my head. So Solomon did everything he ever wanted to do, got everything he wanted, had everything. And all of that wisdom, all of the desires that he had and engaged in led to this. And these are Solomon's words. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. This is the result. This is the insight and wisdom of a man who lived everything. It's worth absolutely nothing without God. Nothing. So all the toils, all the stress that I'm under, all the things that I want to get, absolutely nothing in the end. And why is it so hard? Why is it so hard for us to get our head around that and to dive into it?
Well, at what point in his life did he say that? I mean, did he say that at the beginning and then forget, or was it at the end with the perspective looking back? Because obviously it wasn't near death when he completely lost perspective of who God was. I think the abundance of anything has its challenges, because once we have, we stop needing. Once we stop needing, we don't need God anymore either. I think that happened in the garden with the fruit. I think that happened in a lot of the relationships, like the brothers of Joseph. They had an abundance, and one became a thorn, and they got rid of it. I think that's what we struggle with the most is when we have abundance, sometimes we take our eye off of what truly is important, like God, and I think that's what Solomon said. But I don't know at what point he did it, because he ended up walking away from God.
He came back at the end, though. So this to me feels like it's more toward the end of his life when he's writing this. But what about those that don't have a lot? What about those that aren't satisfied? I'll give you an example. I struggle sometimes because I have a master's degree in architecture. I've done 20 or 30 side jobs through the years where I've designed houses for people. And I think the smallest one I ever designed was probably 3,000 square foot. And I live in a 1,500 square foot home. So every time I do one of these drawings, it gets into my mind, why can't I have this? I don't have it yet. Why can't I have this? What is it in us that lets us focus on those things? And how do we draw that to our attention when we get into that situation? How do we remind ourselves of what Solomon came to a conclusion of? It's not about this stuff. It never has been about this stuff. Where are we at in our hearts and our minds when we deal with our everyday life? Is there something in us that keeps us from what Solomon's conclusion was? Or is it just this is an everyday fight, everyday struggle for the rest of our lives to not be that way, to not look for those the more.
So the question is, do you think that Paul, when he faced opposition against him, he didn't say, look, I could have been in your place, you guys with a lot of wealth, I could have been that. And then he writes in Philippians, be content in whatever situation you're in. And that is a person that is looking at where they are and saying, you know what, I'm nothing without God. I think Paul answers what you're moving toward says, find contentment. No matter where you are in it, you've got to find that happiness that creates a relationship, with you and God.
So it once again turns back to, where is your focus? Because your focus always has to get back to God. And that seems to be the reoccurring theme throughout all of this is, where is your focus? That's Israel's story. That's our story.
Focus on God really helps bring contentment.
Helps bring contentment,
You
correct.
accept the situation as best as you can. I mean, things aren't always pleasant, but you kind of roll with the punches, I guess.
It gives you the peace to do that,
Yes,
okay?
gives some fortitude.
Yeah. So what else does focusing on God versus circumstances do for you in y'all's experience?
Helps to remove jealousy
Removes jealousy, okay?
and vanity.
Yeah. Focus on what we do in life versus what we have in life. Anyone else? Yes. And one last thing, that what Ben said made me remember this, and it just continues to strike me more and more as we go through the story, how God uses situations, bad decisions, bad characters, or lowly characters to constantly further his kingdom. David screwed up. With Bathsheba. God took that situation. Bathsheba becomes the mother of God's chosen king. God's chosen king screws up by following other gods, but then God takes him, uses that wisdom that he gained through that to give us what we have here today. So God is always constantly working, whether we see it or not, in our bad decisions and whatever our situation is. If we turn to him and look to him, he can make it right. And I think that's what I want to leave y'all with today. Thank y'all.